다시 기르신 메토처럼 쉐라빙신 내념하니 상계 신유 밑대우하기 조금 남각 신라 주파쇼 Yamguratnamanda Kamgiryasayami Samge Chedam Soki Shoknanda Jamshu Vardu Dani Kyapsuchi Dadi Chunye Kipe Sanamki Rola Benchir Sangye Drupasho Sangye Shirang Soki Choknanda Jamshu Vardu Dani Kyasuchi Dadi Junye Gipe Sanamki Rola Penshir Sangye Drupasho Sangye Shirang Soki Choknanda Jamshu Vayu Dani Kyasuchi Dadi Shinyen Gipe Sanamki Rola Benchir Sangye Drupasho
So keeping the energy of these prayers, the blessing of the lineage that pours through us simply by repeating their vibration in the language of Tibet, the language in which these prayers have been spoken for at least 12, 13, 1400 years. Settle your body in a comfortable meditation posture. And once you've found a position in which you can sit upright, energized, at attention, begin then to release your weight into the posture without losing the energy of sitting upright. See how much you can relax into all the places of contact between what you call your body and your cushion, your chair, floor. Try to notice this contact, this weightedness, precisely as sensation, perhaps a whole series of sensations, without trying to draw a picture of what your body looks like sitting, but rather just letting the non-conceptual experience of the sensations of the earth element talk to you. And once you feel deeply grounded in this way, you can begin to watch the fluidity, the flexibility of the water element as it presents itself to you. You may experience it on the outside as humidity or water on your skin, but try mostly to focus on the experience of fluidity inside, again without drawing pictures, just letting it flow through you. Let your body be liquid without losing its form. Then begin to feel the heat of fire element that is by nature rising. Associated with the upward moving winds. And without forcing or overlaying any preconceived idea, try to feel the forces in your body that are keeping you upright. You may feel heat or vibration in many forms, but try to focus more toward the center of your body. And isolate those upward moving forces. That are neither solid nor liquid, but sheer energy. You may start to feel some strong sensations in your skull and your face. Try to relax into them. When the time is right, you can start to rest your focus on the exhalation of the breath through your nostrils, shifting from the forceful upward movement of fire into the release of air. Again, letting the breath exhale all the way if necessary, further than you thought you had. And don't try to pull it in, but let it come as a pure gift. Over which you have no control. The gift of life itself. And then when you're ready, still without forcing anything, you can expand the scope of your awareness. And still watching the flow of the movements of energy associated with your breathing. Allow that to become a full body experience. How is that wind element passing through your whole being, triggering sensations of which you are the recipient, not the controller, the observer, not the maker. And very gently, you can soften and focus the attention once again, but now in the area of your heart, at the back of your chest, just in front of the spine, about the level of your sternum, but it's different for each person. You will find your heart as it opens. You can be very aware of the rising and falling of the rib cage as you slowly, gently let your awareness fall back into this sacred holy of holies within your being. And if you can, for a moment, try to tap into the knowledge, the sense that there is a source of life within you, deeper than any of these sensations, deeper even than the experience of breathing. The source of your very being, your very being aware. Is it you? Is it other than you? This is a great mystery. But if you can release into the faith that somehow there is a foundation to your being, don't worry about how it exists for now. But that somehow the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who have sworn to save you, who have sworn to help you for as many eons as it takes to reach your own enlightenment. Somehow they are not separate from this ground of your own being. They call to you at your ground. And so as though an energy arises from your own heart, rising through that central channel of energy, through the center of your forehead, that divine energy manifests as a sacred being in front of you, both separate from you and not separate from you. And see there in the space opposite your own eyes, smaller than you experience your body to be now, but large enough to experience the grandeur of a divine being manifest from a world utterly beyond this one, which you will access when your own heart opens completely. And as before, let that being manifest in divine beauty, however it most naturally appears to you. And if you don't see anything at all, that's fine, as long as the sense of presence is there. And in the acknowledgement of that presence, feel your heart bow down. And then try to identify one thing in your life maybe that you're clinging to most stubbornly, that you most identify with, something you need to be happy. And whether it's true or not that you need it to be happy, see that you can give it away to this sublime being. In honor and in gratitude. And then find the thing about which you are most ashamed. Maybe that thing that you don't want to identify as me, but still that you have witnessed your own body, speech, or mind take part in. Could be a small thing, could be a big thing, but you know what it is. And offer that too, with the prayer that it be purified. And the resolution, the determination to change with divine blessing. And then look into these shining eyes, a manifestation of unconditional love, looking back at you. And know that you are loved. In a way, no one in this world is capable of loving you. Know that the Buddha takes joy in you even when you have accomplished nothing at all. Try to experience the warmth of a being who appreciates you just for being. How could your heart not ask such a being to stay with you? Let your heart express it. And ask also for the teachings that will come when you surrender yourself to such a teacher. And then knowing that this teacher wishes to dwell in the very heart from which they came, call upon them to come and rest above your head first. And see the form of light dance there, re-manifest above your crown. And in honor of Chinsel Kapa, the teacher of the content we will be studying today and days following, I'll just recite the mantra most associated with him a little bit, but you can recite or remain silent as you wish and just allow that presence to slowly descend into your own heart. And express your own deepest prayer that the Lama, the teacher, in forms you know and forms you haven't met yet, may remain unmoving in your own heart, never to leave. Try to taste this kind of refuge. And dream of the day that the Lama will say to you, or you will know, how can I leave you? I am you. Then let your heart expand with this presence so much greater than your body can bear. And let that love pour out in the form of light rays, reaching out to every living being you've ever seen, spoken to, touched, perhaps the mind streams of the insects and animals you've killed, the people you have disliked, people you have loved, people who have nurtured you, people who have despised you. Let your heart open to all of them, everywhere, in all the directions of space. And know that when you reach the hearts of a living being, you reach the hearts of every living being. You're not reaching individual lifetimes. You're reaching an entire continuum of lifetimes. All contained within a single stream, a single heart for each being. So when you reach out to beings, you embrace them all the beings they've been in the past and all the beings they will be in the future. How can you pledge yourself without such equanimity? And then knowing that your heart is strong and strengthened by this divine and transcendent teacher within. See if you are willing, in that divine presence, in that divine being, to take the pain of the world upon yourself. You don't need to visualize it so much now, just experience what would it be to dwell at the center of reality and take upon every in-breath the pain of the world. Dissolve and eliminate it within yourself and pour out again an infinite love. Let your breath ride on this vast thought of giving and taking for a little while. And then gently let your breath relax again and come to the surface of what appears to be your skin, feeling the flood of your teacher's presence within you. open your eyes slowly, just in front of you. Try to keep this relaxed, clear presence. And even as we begin to engage the conceptual mind, engage the senses, don't lose that groundedness in your own mind. Thank you. Such a privilege to meditate with all of you. So I see mostly familiar faces from Tuesday, so I'll jump right in and review a little bit. Don't worry, I'll start with a review. And as I said on Tuesday, please do, if you can, take notes. I think it'll help to almost draw the structure for yourself as we continue. You'll probably gather that I have a quite visual mind in the sense of ideas. And so I realized that may not work for everybody, like when I was dancing with things here and here and all over the place, but hopefully you can get used to it. I was a dancer, as many of you know. So I realized that I think choreographically, even with very abstract ideas sometimes. And it's very helpful for analytical meditation, I will tell you, because to make any progress in meditating on emptiness, meditating on kind of origination and so on, you actually need to cultivate a mind that can hold ideas without seeing words. Most of us don't really think of ideas in terms of words on paper, right? So we all have our own pictorial ways of memorizing and organizing things. I'm saying, yeah, architecturally your mind must work. And so, for example, if you're memorizing the steps of the Lam Rim, it's not just a sequence. It's a house, as some of you may have received the Lam Rim meditation as moving through rooms of a house. But there are many different ways you can organize that structure. And as you become more familiar with them, then it's not linear at all. You start to be able to bring in ideas from all directions. And to me, that's one of the most beautiful analytical meditation experiences, when almost without trying. And this is when both the habit of practice and the blessing of the teacher come together. Almost without trying, you see threads from very different teachings. You may have received at different times, you may have meditated on extensively at different times, and then they start to pop. And you might say at some level, this is karmic seeds popping. This is when your meditation becomes ripe, and you start to see how things connect. And for me personally, it can be really overwhelming at times, because there's the part of the conceptual mind that then wants to go memorize it as it's happening and keep track of, wait, what was that idea? But if you stop the flow, then you actually don't get to see the movie of what's ripening in your mind now. So I say that partially as encouragement for the value of both taking notes, but also learning to keep teachings in your head as you hear them, and almost try to figure out the structure that the teacher is following, even if it's not written up on a board or something like that. So I'm challenging you. So to review the structure that we were working with on Tuesday, I was suggesting that there are almost two major overarching, well, now I'm going to state it bigger than I did on Tuesday. There are two major overarching paradigms of religion in this world, in this planet. And they have to do with a world that was created pure by some kind of divine ground, divine being, divine Godhead. And I'm using general language deliberately right now in order to encompass a variety of traditions. But that the great variety of worlds and beings were somehow designed with purpose in mind. And that the reason they're suffering now is because somewhere along the way things went wrong and things got messed up. I mean, that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. We've all, whether we've been part of that kind of religious paradigm or not, we're all aware of it, right? And then there's, I won't dare say that Buddhism is completely unique in this, but it's a little bit unique in its presentation of suffering first. We don't usually hear that as the first principle of other religions, even Indian religion. I don't feel comfortable enough with my knowledge of Jainism to say what the first premise is there. But the presentation of, as I say, the 4 Arya truths, the things seen by an Arya, remember, they're not noble. The first 2 are definitely not noble. They are the 4 truths realized by an Arya when they see ultimate reality directly. But the first thing that is known after that contact with ultimate reality is the fact of suffering in the world that's not that ultimate reality. And so in that sense, so the fact of suffering comes as the first premise or the first thing experienced in a Buddhist presentation. And then the cause of that is what one has to find out. The cessation of that suffering is what one has to attain or get to, and the path is what one has to realize. But there's something about the notion of cessation which is very hard for our minds to come around, because if it's presented only, and it usually is presented only negatively, as in the absence of mental afflictions, that can sometimes leave us with a sense of, yeah, but what is there to look forward to, actually? Has anyone ever had that feeling of, oh yeah, okay, I don't want to have mental afflictions, I don't want to be suffering, I don't want to have pain, and I'm aware that there's some presentation of a Buddha world that is blissful. In Mahayana Buddhism, we've always heard about that aspect of it. But what would that really be like? And is that some other world that's been created by a different set of causes from this world? Or is there something about this world that could fundamentally be pure already? Or, and now I'm jumping to a next step, does there have to be something fundamentally pure about this world in order that that transformation could ever take place? There have been a lot of religious paradigms in the ancient world, particularly the Latin and Greek worlds, 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, where the notion of salvation really meant get out of here. But that meant get out of here to another spirit realm, because this world of matter is doomed. You know, and that, so there can be a true dualism then of a world where, gee, it's bad, we've got to get out. Or there are other worldviews that in different ways say there's something about this world that isn't inherently bad. Notice that we use the word inherently now. Isn't inherently bad. So it's this world itself that could be changed, but by the time it's changed, will we recognize it anymore? See how your mind has to sort of jump around to even hold those ideas, because we're looking at a room that it all appears to us probably a bit differently to each of us, but we have a certain general common experience, and we know the limitations of this world, and so I'll dare say that once meditating on emptiness, the very question of what it is that this world that's going to be changed will slip through your fingers. But that's not, I think, probably not happening for most of us yet, because as long as we're in a concrete body, it's pretty clear the body that can be cut and hurt and hungry and uncomfortable and tired and the rest of it. Like, as long as it's conventionally arising as something that's suffering, we know what the basis to be transformed is. But the deeper we go in actually trying to find what it is that's going to be transformed, that's when it has to slip through our fingers, and that's when we find the ground, the emptiness that isn't there. I mean, the absence of what we thought was there, that I'm now jumping to suggest would be this ground from which a pure reality could arise. But then there's the problem of the word pure right there. Is pure a world that is simply free of mental affliction? Or is pure a world where all thoughts are virtue? Or is pure simply something that is, as at a certain point, Jetson Kappa says, pure is the absence of any nature. So, again, I'm going to float this idea for now. That I will end up using the word pure in a couple different ways. Because sometimes pure simply means the lack of any nature. And in that sense, we are pure already, because we don't have any nature. But it almost doesn't help much if that's all we think of it. Oh, well. The fact these eyeglasses lack any nature of their own, and therefore are pure of any nature, doesn't particularly make them special. I mean, actually, if everything has that kind of purity, it doesn't make it special. And just the fact of that purity doesn't make this an enlightened world. It's simply an absence. And so again, almost like the absence of mental afflictions. And by the way, these are the two kinds of nirvana. I've been speaking of the natural nirvana, which is the absence of nature, and the achieved nirvana, which is the absence of mental afflictions. But still, we're talking about absences. So the question I'm posing to you, which in a Buddhist context sort of forces us into a Vajrayana context, a way of thinking, is what is pure and also functioning? What is pure and also has qualities and is not simply a lack of qualities? What is pure as in a mind that can think and act, but utterly without mental affliction and without obstacle? So now if I'm using the word namdak, which is one of the many Tibetan words for pure, you can start to be thinking, well, what would a Buddha's wisdom be like? What would this pure bodhicitta be like? Laksam namdak, if you know that term for the extraordinary pure thought, the catalyst for true bodhicitta, which is the personal responsibility to take care of every living being. Then we're talking about a thought that has content, that has direction, and it is pure. It's pure because it's exalted. So I'm not actually answering any of my questions right now, but I'm just getting you to think about these different valences of the word pure and how all of them do fit together, but they're not exactly the same. And then there's this notion of creation, which is what kind of minds create what? And we had that quotation from Jetsun Kappa's Samaja commentary about the two different kinds of Lord. The Lord of consciousness that creates the suffering worlds, and the Lord of consciousness who is Vajradhara, the holder of the diamond, the Buddha in his secret form. And Jetsun Kappa was very careful to distinguish. These are not the same consciousness. These are not the same Lord of consciousness, even though in the text by Nagabuddhi, great Samaja commentator, it seemed as though those two terms were being applied to the same mind. And what that challenges us to consider in a Vajrayana context is, are those two streams, the stream of stained consciousness and the stream of pure consciousness, and now notice I'm not talking about consciousness just as lacking any nature, I'm talking about consciousness as in the mind of Vajradhara that can create perfect worlds, that are worlds, that are beauty, that are goodness, that are love, and free of suffering. Is there a continuum between those two minds where they're not ultimately separate? Because if there were a way of somehow plummeting from our ordinary consciousness into a stream of enlightened consciousness that didn't start anywhere, because how could you have a first moment of a Buddha's mind? The enlightened mind is free of obscuration. I'll just leave that as a rhetorical question for now. How could it ever start? I mean, we have the analysis in the Diamond Cutter course on the first moment of a Buddha's enlightenment and when the causes finally reach their fruition and you're ready to be catapulted into the Dharmakaya. But even then, there are lots of debates about it, but you can't really hold the Dharmakaya as a changing thing that started. The mind part is a changing thing in that mind perpetuates itself moment by moment by moment, and insofar as an omniscient mind knows things that are changing, it must be changing. But the language that is still used more frequently, even in a sutra sense, is a removal of obstacles to being that Dharmakaya mind. So to what extent is the process of enlightenment a removal of the causes for this experience of a conditioned consciousness, a namprashepa, a sentient being's mind? As he said, the creator of the impure worlds and the beings in it, and a dropping into a stream of enlightened awareness that couldn't have had any beginning. And this is really dangerous territory to talk about in Buddhism and in a Gelug center in particular, because we usually think of Tsongkhapa as having been extremely careful around this kind of language. There have been debates among schools of Tibetan Buddhism about precisely these kinds of ideas for a long time. And I know I'm not going to be able to get into all of the details necessary to support it in the next few days, so I know I'm on tenuous ground right now. But there are passages in Tsongkhapa's commentaries specifically on mantras within a Vajrayana sadhana that start to point to this union of the purity that is the lack of inherent nature of the mind and the purity that is the Dharmakaya. And he even says that the mind and its emptiness are called by the same word. So they're called the Vajra, the unchanged, they're called indestructible and unchanging, even though the mind is changing, but because it is inseparable from its emptiness, you can apply the same word to them. So what I'm trying to get across is that there is an infinite depth of mystery here as to what the deeper layers of mind are that could be the very foundation for enlightenment and for the possibility of pure worlds. And what can be very difficult for us as practitioners is almost to get glimpses of that in our own longing for a spiritual path, in our own longing for transcendence, almost like the instinct of, I know there's got to be something better than this, and yet to still care enough about the details of figuring out how this suffering world works. so that we can start to put a stop to the causes for this suffering world and become more and more ready and right to penetrate through to a deeper level of consciousness, of pristine consciousness that's at the ground of our own being. And that there are widely divergent ways of accessing within the Vajrayana systems, but in the end, they all come down to this extremely subtle mind of clear light, as it's called. So I mentioned that in Vajrayana ritual or meditation as well, there's a great deal of creation that goes on. With the sentient being's mind, we don't have any other to start out with. I mean, we can't suddenly not use our mind, even when we're doing some very holy practice. It's still the same continuum of the mind that woke up in the morning and sat down and prepared the altar. We can't suddenly just escape it in order to enter another world. So we have to use the mind we have in order to begin to access a different kind of reality. But if we start trying to build up even glorious images of holy beings and a sacred crystal palace, offerings, enlightened activity such as we began to taste at the end of our meditation just now, and some part of us still thinks that we're just the being we were when we got up and sat down, there will be a cognitive dissonance there that will end up either blocking the practices so that we don't really believe them, or we'll believe them as imagination. But when push comes to shove, well, yeah, that was just my imagined world. Or we end up living in an imaginary world that's out of touch with reality. I mean, come on, this is New York, right? So I'm just going to read a little bit of a paragraph here. This is my own writing. My own, what does that mean? The theoretical point at stake here, and I am commenting on the very paragraph that we worked with. Can I just have a show of hands who wasn't here on Tuesday? Oh, then I'll read it. I'll read it to you, so everybody has the seat. So this is from Jetsukapa's, one of his great commentaries on the Gurya Samaja Sadhana, and he's commenting on a short line from Nagaburi, who's actually considered to be a disciple of Arya Nagarjuna way back in the 2nd century, but then both Arya Nagarjuna and Nagaburi show up as authors of Gurya Samaja tantric texts maybe in the 9th or 10th century. It's a subject of great debate among scholars. I'm just going to leave it there. Where those texts came from, the tradition believes they're from the mind streams of Nagarjuna and Nagaburi, and I will not argue with that. So Nagaburi's phrase is, then that Lord of Consciousness, the great Vajradhara, the creator of beings with a mind, that is sentient beings, after creating the vessel of a world, must certainly send forth realms of living beings, because it is stated, and this is paraphrase of a verse from the Gurya Samaja Tantra, when you have meditated first upon the place, then create the 3 Vajras and meditate. The 3 Vajras being the holy body, speech, and mind. So the root text being this notion of first meditate on the place, then create the 3 Vajras. And so Nagaburi is saying it's the Lord of Consciousness, the great Vajradhara, the creator of sentient beings. You ever heard that phrase in Buddhism before, the creator of sentient beings? Okay, I just wanted to make sure I'm not crazy to notice this. The creator of sentient beings, after creating the vessel of a world, must certainly send forth realms of living beings. So Jetsukapa's commentary on this As for who it is that, quote, sends forth realms of living beings, it is something that is both consciousness and also a lord. For it is that which creates the mind of all beings with a mind, semchen, that is, impure living beings. It wields dominion, i.e. the word for lord, it wields dominion over the creation of worlds, the vessels that come from the accumulation of actions shared by these living beings, and the inhabitants that come from the accumulation of actions unique to each one, so collective and individual karma. And so it's saying that this consciousness, which is a lord, is master over the creation of worlds because it creates the karma that produces the environments, and it creates the karma that produces the individual inhabitants. Therefore, it is a lord or creator. And then Jitsokapa quotes entering the middle way, Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Avatara, saying, and these are two verses from the Madhyamaka Avatara. Since the Victoria Swan did not see the person and so on, those things claimed by those outside the fold according to their respective scriptures, to be any of them a creator, he said the mind alone is maker of the worlds. And then, by mind itself are the worlds of living beings arranged, and by mind itself are the immense variety of worlds that are the vessels set forth. It is stated that every wanderer, without exception, was born from karma. If you abandon the mind, then even karma would not exist. Then Jitsokapa comments, the great Vajradhara is the creator of pure living beings, that circle of divine beings, that is a mandala. This is true because it is said that all the sacred circles, consisting of foundations and those who rest upon such foundations, are the parts of his own holy body, sent forth as these pure worlds. Later on in Nagabuddhi's text, the mind of the intermediate state, the Bardo, will also be called the Lord of Consciousness, the Vajra of holy mind. Yet it would not make sense to explain these two, the Lord of Consciousness and Vajradhara, as though they were one and the same. Furthermore, to explain that the living beings of the suffering cycle were created by Vajradhara is not the meaning. Here, Vajradhara is being held as the principal figure of the mandala of sheer conviction. The time to send forth two realms of living beings, that is, the pure and the impure, is after creating the two worlds, which are pure and impure vessels. And so my own thoughts on this, which I feel I want to read to you, rather than go round and round now. The theoretical point at stake here is that once understanding how the world in which we currently live came into being, the creation stage meditator, that is someone practicing a tantric sadhana, is meant to produce at first only as a visualized mental image, so you're doing a lot of visualization work, a picture of an ideal world that is symbolically correlated to the suffering world he or she is seeking to transform. So a huge amount of Vajrayana meditation has these specific symbolic correlations between the things in our impure world and the things we're trying to transform them into. At a certain level, you might say that the things in our suffering world are the degradation or the mistaken version of this pure world thing. And so we're trying to get them back to a purity. But that's another moot point, and that has to do with my whole first thing about different religious approaches, which I'm suggesting come together in Vajrayana in a very interesting way. However, if this is to be more than a mere exercise in wishful thinking, as I just said, or aesthetic idealization, or even fantastical escapism, the meditator must understand quite precisely the stuff of which the suffering world was made in the first place. Otherwise, neither the preceding meditative dissolution into emptiness, nor the following creation of a crystalline palace inhabited by majestic divine beings will carry much metaphysical weight. So you get, I mean, we don't use the word metaphysical so often now, but it's in the sense of what's real, what is there. And so if you don't know what the suffering world is made of, so you don't really believe the dissolution into emptiness, then if you create a world from the imagination, it doesn't carry much weight. We might say it doesn't matter a hill of beans. Nor will it be convincing enough to the meditator to bring about transformational results of any lasting significance. One cannot dissolve, even logically and conceptually. You don't have to get to the direct realization yet, but if you can't even logically and conceptually dissolve every last trace of the universe as it appears to us now, by means of the meditations on emptiness that precede each new creation in a tantric practice ritual, it will be no more than child's play. Though he does not say so directly here, I posit that Tsongkhapa recognized this fact, and that's why he cared so much to offer, spread across the many different genres or styles of his work, every philosophical tool he knew in order to lead the perspicacious disciple to an unshakable understanding of the logical foundations for this ample use of the imagination that would be required in the course of creation state practice. So it's like, once you start studying Vajrayana, you see how the extensive work that Tsongkhapa did in the sutra vehicle is all a setup to make sure you have all the tools you need to believe your Vajrayana, to believe your attention side. And I made a choice in my writing, and I'm also making this choice here, to actually deal with creation before we deal with dissolution. In the sadhana, the dissolution has to come first. But I know you have a lot of background in emptiness, one way or the other. You've heard it a lot. You've studied it a lot. There will be more to say about that. But it's this world being made of mind that I feel like is still harder for us to grasp, or harder for us to grasp subtly enough. As I mentioned on Tuesday, and I want to be very clear about my perspective on this, the Geshe Michael's gorgeous teaching on the 4 steps. How many people are familiar with the 4 steps? Yeah, great. So the idea, and this is very tantric, by the way, of creating your world through karma, that's actually a Vajrayana idea, in the sense that you would use the laws of karma to shift your world. And it's profound and powerful because we can do so much with it so fast. And so all I feel like, actually maybe that's all anybody needs, but what I feel I'm offering here is ways that we can work with our philosophy and our knowledge of scriptures when doubts come up. We're not quite sure, is this really going to work? Or can I actually change the world through the way I think about my motivation in the morning and how I help other people and how I dedicate it? Like, why would that work? Why would my mind be able to have such a powerful effect in shifting my world? And then these subtle questions about, to what degree is the reality that comes back to me just my mind? Or how did things actually happen? Like, if karma is going to ripen, it's going to ripen in a big way, and people are going to show up in our lives. And it really matters how subtle our view is of who these people are, and how they are the manifestations of our own karma, and how they are the manifestations of their karma. And I will suggest to you, there's no contradiction. People can be the manifestations of their own karma and our karma at the same time, no problem, because of their emptiness and because of our emptiness. But the dangers, I think, that lie in any stage of the Buddhist teaching, and as I said last time, this may be some of the origin of the different schools of ancient Buddhism. How even people in our world who know Buddhism really, really well have shifted toward one or another extreme of the view, and the process of our own learning about emptiness is getting closer and closer to the middle way. So that's why this question of what does it mean for the worlds to be made only from mind, as it comes up here and as it comes up in the entering the middle way, becomes so important for us. Precisely in the midst of trying to transform our everyday worlds with the 4 steps. So my sense is that one point Tsongkhapa is making here, why does he need to go back to these verses from Chandrakuti, as I said, to support the tantric idea with the sutra idea? I think at one level what he's trying to say is there is value in the imagination because there was no other force that ever made the world in the first place. Like if the world were made by something external, over which we had no control, in the sense of our deepest layers of our mind had no control, then there wouldn't be much point in planting new seeds within our own minds. Maybe it would change our psychological projections or our surface layer, how we interpret things. But it couldn't change the world. It couldn't change the way that atoms spin. It couldn't change the forces of nature. I'm saying that if things didn't fundamentally come from mind. And yet, if things fundamentally come from mind, then it matters inexorably to be able to get to the foundations of our own mind and almost start over. Or not just almost, start over. And then the motivation, not just to meditate half an hour a day, but to go deeper, deeper, and deeper into the foundations of our own consciousness, moment to moment to moment, and say, wait, how is it creating the world? Is this true? And could enough concentration, enough subtlety, and enough good motivation be able to, from the root, from the subtlest level, change the way the energies rise to produce a physical world and a mental world? And so that's why these questions of how can a physical world be made from mind and not be the same as mind become very important. Because the middle way view that Tsongkhapa espouses is that everything is made from mind, but that in no way denigrates the existence of physical matter. But then that leaves us the problem of what is the ontological status of physical matter? And are we experiencing the same floor? Is it there? Are the atoms there? What's the difference between the atoms that are there and the colors and shapes that appear to our visual senses and the weight that appears to our, I want to say our gravitational senses? And that's why it's important to do that kind of a meditation that we started with and be aware of the Buddhist phenomenological notion of the elements as a series of sensations. This is not experimental science in the sense of trying to find out what's there objectively. It's the notion of the 4 or the 5 elements, including empty space, was always a meditative experience of how the different elements, I want to say, pop in a moment-to-moment meditative experience. Well, even when the scriptures speak of outer form, they do mean something more objective than those subjective experiences of meditation. And I hesitate to get as deeply into the text as I was in my review today, but I think we probably need to do some of it, at least some of it, so you get a taste of what grappling with Tsongkhapa's mind feels like. Do you need a break? Is it a good time for a break? I think try to come back by 9. Okay. We may go over tonight. Woo!
There's too many blown minds to say.
Well, that was just the review.
If anyone didn't register at the front or pay, can you please do that because our computer was down? Thank you.
So please be comfortable. And as I said, within a minute or two of 9 o'clock, please come back.
Just a question.
Hi, wait, can you stay after to ask me that? Or? Yeah, I just need to look around. I have this all applied. Thank you. What's your name? Good. Great to meet you. Let's meet after.
See my friend.
I'm okay, thank you. I've almost reviewed most of what we did on Tuesday now. Once I realized. I admit that I just postponed that to some kind of if you ever want to say
Just landed there and called it. That makes sense.
I will be literally inviting you to well, is this
Okay, great. So I will I can't.
This is the part, so this is the installation. Yeah, very again. So let me go see. It's okay. So you really Yes. What Yes. Hardly, but also I think no, and he doesn't really like every time I go there. That's what it is. Specifically. Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah. So that's just, you really so that's my
A little something or
yeah. Actually, that's 4 or 5 hours.
For me personally, once you start eating, so it's easier to like wait for later to start.
I used to how sometimes might have given smart guy. He's like, this is yeah, but it's funny. So it's also fitting. While you're at a dinner table, that's It's very shiny and it's over there on the corner. A red it's just like everyone's so it was that and
Feel your knowledge, drinking it in. Like I can see your face, and I know how many levels of it you're applying.
I'm sorry.
Sarah, buy one, get one.
Sure. Well, I don't know what it is.
Think you can review the mind-only school in 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want you to. I'm trying to set it on the team to your left.
I probably make it.
No. You keep switching.
That was very well done. Yeah, okay, I can work with that. But now we're going to look at the source. We're going to look at the source. Right. Okay, is everybody? Always. So I said we'd review the mind-only school in 10 minutes, and I'm mostly joking. It's just one more sentence I went through today and highlighted sentences I want to share. I don't know if that'll work as a method. Can you understand me when I'm reading? I'm always aware of how difficult that is for me to understand somebody when they're, but is it working?
Yes.
A little slower. Thank you. So I'm not going to push the interreligious dialogue or comparison anymore, really. I think I'm going to leave that alone as of now. But the last thing I want to say for now about it, as some of you know, this is a huge part of my own life. as a Christian and Buddhist practitioner together. So I can't help but think that way, but we just can't even begin to cover it here. Oh, and I better do this. But just for now, in case anybody got nervous, I don't know if I projected the feeling of nervousness in our meditation of looking for a source, a real source. Anybody feel that sort of, oh God, am I looking for an Atman now? Am I looking for a soul? Am I looking for a real me? Did that pass through anyone's mind?
Sure.
Okay. No, it's good. I'm happy to get that variety. But at this juncture, I'll just suggest that while I think the Vajrayana view that does talk about an extremely subtle mind, that does talk about winds and mind as being the source of all samsara and nirvana, and you start to see that kind of language more and more once you get into Vajrayana as well as Dzogchen texts, they both say it. They talk about the foundation of all samsara and nirvana as the extremely subtle mind or the pristine awareness. So I'll just say that. I've laid out my cards on the table. It's there in the tradition. Whether in the end it means something different from that which is experienced by the Vedanta sages or the Kashmir Shaivas or the Saint Simeon, the new theologian, or Saint John of the Cross, or Kabbalah mystics, or Sufi mystics. You can go on and on of people who are accessing this non-verbal, non-expressible, beyond being ground of reality. And we know that there's a contemplative experience that may well be shared, but I get very nervous as I say that across traditions, because we know the degree to which once something almost rises to the conceptual surface, it will be expressed differently, and it will be understood differently according to the context of the presentation within a religion. So I suspend judgment, I suspend saying anything about whether that is the same experience or not. But you can tell I'm open to it, right? Deeply open to it. But from a philosophical point of view, what I will suggest is unique about the Buddhist view, because it's what's been debated as the Buddhist view for centuries, millennia, is that even in Vajrayana, the pristine fundamental mind of clear light is said to lack any inherent nature of its own. Any inherent nature, that was clear enough. Any inherent nature or any nature of its own, either one. The sentient being's mind also lacks any nature of its own. So it is not as though they're saying a real fundamental mind created a real sentient being's mind that created a real world of suffering that has to be eradicated. And it's not as if you're saying things are really pure because that's the mind that inherently created things the way they're supposed to be, and we're just the mistake, but that's the real world. You see what I'm saying? The very teaching on emptiness actually enables each world to function fully, and that's what's so scary about it. Because our world is false, it is produced by a mistake, and it's still functioning. And the tradition, in the paradigm or the explanation of some traditions, to say that the world is really suffering because of a real sin that undid the divine order, that also works. It works as an explanation, and I have to say that. And one has to be able to go deep enough into a tradition to be able to see why that works. And can that lead somebody to the realization that will ultimately undo the cycle of suffering? And if it can, then it's a functional teaching and it's an authentic revelation. But in a Buddhist context, all I'll suggest appears to be unique philosophically is this notion that now I will read this, because ultimately entities will be found to lack any inherent identity of their own, it is the quality of whichever individual mind is creating appearances that determines how those appearances will appear. at any moment, whether pure, and this I mean pure in the sense of positive, virtuous, wholesome, or impure, as in stained by ignorance. And I should add to that positive, virtuous, wholesome, and unstained by ignorance. I'm not just talking about good karma here, I'm talking about truly pure, unstained reality. So diverse minds create diverse kinds of worlds. And that, I feel, is the tenor of what Tsongkhapa is expressing is, yeah, the Lord of consciousness, which is conditioned consciousness, which is caused by ignorance and karma, does create worlds. And that's what we're in from that perspective. If we could access another kind of mind, we might not physically have to go anywhere. But the world we'd be living in would be a different world created by a different mind. And yet that more profound, all-pervasive, pure mind, at some level, could be creating the appearances, which, because they have no nature of their own, might still appear but not be suffering. And that's when it gets really complicated as to pure view, that this very room with the same, ostensibly the same colors, shapes, sounds, touches, and so on, could be experienced as a totally pure world. But what level of mind would one have to be at for that to be an authentic experience and not an imagined? So welcome to Vajrayana thinking. Okay? Not easy. So now I'm going to jump directly into the text that I'll stay in for the most part for the rest of the course, which is the elimination of the true thought of the middle way, the Umagoparadsa of Tsongkhapa. Just to give you a moment of technical background on this, those familiar with the ACI courses have encountered this text directly, perhaps only twice, in ACI course 5 on karma. I did actually prepare this, so I want to be able to tell you. Reading 5. So course 5, reading 5, is taken directly from Tsongkhapa's Illumination of the True Thought in Geshe Michael's translation. And I believe that one of the presentations at the end of course 15 is also from that book, and that it switched briefly to take something from that book. I'll have to check that for you now. But primarily, I would say that this book is in the background of Geshe Michael's thought throughout the ACI courses, because it's foundational in the structure of the middle way course in Gelug monasteries, particular Saramay where Geshe Michael studied. I got to witness that firsthand, as I mentioned, on Tuesday in the nunnery, which was mostly Gelug. It was technically a non-sectarian nunnery, but they were studying the Gelug system of education, and I saw how the senior nuns, some of whom are Geshe-mas now, were studying the elimination of the true thought, and that's when I got to study it with them. It's just one of the most famous and important books on middle way in the Gelug lineage, and it was Tsongkhapa's verse-by-verse commentary on Master Chandrakirti's Entering the Middle Way, Madhyamaka Avatara, which in turn is a meaning commentary on the verses of the middle way of Arya Nagarjuna. So Master Chandrakirti wrote 2 major commentaries on Nagarjuna, more than that actually, but 2 very famous ones. The Prasanapada, the clear words, which is a verse-by-verse commentary on the Mula Prajna, or the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka, the root verses on the middle way of Nagarjuna. And then this Entering the Middle Way, which, as I say, is a meaning commentary, because you won't find verse by verse. He's not going through the steps of the chapters of the root verses on the middle way, but it's like Chandrakirti's last word on what he thinks Arya Nagarjuna meant. And not to get too bogged down in history, but there was clearly a debate that went on for several centuries through the Indian monastic tradition in trying to figure out what Nagarjuna meant. And there were no actual schools of the what we think of as the Svatantrika and the Prasangika schools. There's no established reference to those schools in any Sanskrit text that we have now. It appears that those were names that were applied later by Tibetans in order to organize what different Indian commentators had done. And so, generally speaking, Bhavaveka is considered to be, as well as Shantarakshita, are generally considered to be Svatantrika thinkers, the independent group, and Buddhapalita, who was much earlier, and then Chandakirti, who sort of revived Buddhapalita and expanded upon him, is considered to be Prasangika, or consequent school. If you don't know those names, don't worry about it. I'm just trying to give you that overall historical structure of why Jetsokapa then, coming in the late 14th, early 15th century, this book was actually written, it was one of the last books he wrote, likely 1418. How coming in the early 15th century, he's looking back at everything he has from the Indian tradition, not necessarily worked out by centuries the way that our historians would look at it, but he still had the sense of sequence for sure, and the way that they quoted each other, and the way that they referred to each other, and sometimes misquoted each other. And he can say over and over again, who would not choose the system of Chandakirti as the best? Because some of you may know that phrase from the Essence of Eloquence, where he finally says, these are all amazing systems, but who would not take that of the glorious moon as supreme? The glorious moon being Chandra, Chandra means moon. So in a sense, you can't even call Nagarjuna Prasangika, because that he used Prasangika logic for sure, and that has meaning. But it's not as if there were sub-schools. He was a founder. He was a wheel-turning, he was an innovator. He invented a wheel. That's why he's called Chitta Temple. And yet his explanation of the middle way, elucidating the true thought of the Buddha in the second turning of the wheel, set the standard for Indian Buddhist thought for all subsequent centuries. And as I mentioned on Tuesday, the mind-only school actually came later. Astrasanga's famous texts, which are thought of as foundational for the mind-only school, and then used these sutras associated with the third turning of the wheel in order to mitigate or explain the Buddha's true thought without sounding quite so extreme or pulling the rug out as Nagarjuna had done. Well, the beginning of that very long sentence was that Nagarjuna stands at the beginning of a long Indian tradition. The mind-only school actually comes a little bit later, and then the whole division into the two parts of the middle way school comes even later than that, and not really until 12th or 13th century Tibet. So Jetsokapa could use the words of independent school and consequent school already within a couple hundred years of Tibetan thought. He didn't make that up. And he wasn't even unique among Tibetans at that time to say the Prasangika is best, because Chandakirti was already quite popular among the Sakyas and the Nyingmas, and I guess the Kagyas as well at that point. But Jetsokapa still had a quite unique way of reading Chandakirti. And I think contemporary scholars are still trying to figure out what he was doing with Chandakirti. Because, and I'll just give you my own personal take on this, it would take decades of research for one person to go through the Umagompa Rabsal and figure out what Jetsokapa was doing in his commentary. Because he quotes huge amounts of Chandakirti's auto commentary, not just the verses, but Chandakirti wrote a very long auto commentary. And Jetsokapa splices his own language right in the middle of those words. So he glosses Chandakirti's own commentary to his own root verses. And one would have to fully grok what Chandakirti was saying, and then fully grok what Jetsokapa is saying, and then fully grok how he interpolated words right in the middle. And you can do that more easily in Tibetan than you can in English. And I tried a couple times to translate the gloss so that you could see what was Chandakirti and what was Jetsokapa, and it doesn't work. But just a minute. But to understand how Jitso Kapo was mostly adding words, never, well, he excerpted, but he was adding words in order to say, this is what Chandakirti meant, this is what Chandakirti meant, this is, and of course, contemporary Western scholars often say, well, that's Jitso Kapo's opinion, that couldn't have been what Chandakirti meant. And so I pray that we will continue in the scholarship of trying to understand the interaction between these thinkers and realize how much innovation, if you want to call it that, there is in Tsongkhapa's thought. How maybe he understood Chandakirti better than, I won't say better than Chandakirti did, but you sometimes feel that Tsongkhapa has the confidence in his own understanding that he is willing to say, well, this is what Chandakirti meant. And so therefore, it's not just Chandakirti saying what Nagarjuna meant, it's Tsongkhapa saying what Chandakirti meant, so Nagarjuna meant the Buddha meant.
Would this mean, what do you mean auto commentary?
Oh yeah, it literally translates the Tibetan Rangjel, which means a commentary by the author on their own verses. It shows up, Geshe Michael has used that word and I followed it. So Master Vasubandhu wrote his own commentary to the Abhidhamma Kosha. And so sometimes, I know this comes up in the ACF courses, Geshe Michael will say, and the auto commentary to Vasubandhu's text is, and the answer is Vasubandhu. So in this case, the auto commentary of Chandakirti is Chandakirti. But yeah, thank you for reminding me that that's not a naturalized term. We don't automatically understand what that means. So, in order to understand the debate to which those verses that I've already read to you pulled out, saying, yes, the world is made for mind only, but this is already Chandakirti's proclamation of that from a middle way point of view, we have to understand the massive debate that's going on within this text. Quick structure on the text. It covers the 10 Bodhisattva levels. The first 5 Bodhisattva levels, well, first 6 are associated with each of the 6 perfections. For those of you who have been following Geshe Michael's translator course over the past decade almost, he's been working up from the beginning, both with Jitso Kapa's text and also a later Tibetan commentary on it, which he did. I have to confess, I don't know exactly how far he's gotten now, but I think it's still within, can anyone correct me, it's still within the first 5 perfections, right? You don't know? Okay. But more than half the book is on the 6th perfection of wisdom, right? Of prajna. Because even though there's reference to emptiness throughout the first 5, ironically, even though you'd think that a bodhisattva has seen emptiness directly from the very first bodhisattva level, and he has, I mean, that's the definition of an Arya, there's something about the 6th bodhisattva level that, according to Chandakirti, suddenly the Arya's understanding of emptiness just skyrockets. And that's a point that I still feel quite unclear on, why his commentary on emptiness actually only comes to the 6th bodhisattva level. Whether that's a convention of having used the others in order to elaborate on the other perfections, or whether in the bodhisattva path there is some drastic exponential improvement in the understanding of emptiness, not only in obviously the direct perception is always the same, but in maybe the way that it comes out of that direct perception and understands appearances. But as I say, the bulk of the presentation of entering the middle way is on this 6th chapter. And so these verses are 686 and 689, so you can tell there's been a lot of verses before that. And just for the moment, I'm going to go back to verse 662, i.e. chapter 6, verse 62. And this is a passage which may be vaguely familiar to you because it was in ACI course 5, I think reading 5. But because I had to for my own academic work, I did my own translation, and maybe hearing it in a slightly different translation, you'll even hear it just differently. So I'll go quickly here because this may be a review, but it's essential information for us to have as to the mind-only school view of mind-only, and also things coming from seeds, the world coming from seeds. So this is as explicit as it can get, and this is a part of the text where the mind-only view is being presented. So this is not in a middle way voice. This is saying what the mind-only school thinks. As to whether the middle way will accept this particular part is our subject of debate. Like, I think most of this i.e. these holy beings who understand what the middle way is, not me, those of the middle way accept most of this presentation. And it's still unclear to me a certain part of it, whether they accept or not, and that's for us to figure out. The I mind's birth comes to be from its potential, just following an instance. It's thought to be the physical faculty of an I upon the basis, the potential of its consciousness. The Tibetan is just as obscure. That's the point of these verses, and in Sanskrit too. You get the words, you get a little bit of grammatical connection between them, but you don't know it yet until you have a commentary. Now, fortunately, Chandakirti gave his auto commentary, so Jetsakapa wasn't completely making up his interpretation. So I'll just say that again. The I mind's birth. This is a very particular phrase, Miki Lo, which literally means the mind of the I. And it's referring to the I consciousness. But they're using the word lo, which you usually think of as an entire state of mind. I often translate lo as state of mind. It's buddhi in Sanskrit. So the I mind's birth comes to be from its potential. That's a karmic potential. Just following an instance. We have to find out what the instance is. It's thought to be the physical faculty of an I upon the basis, the potential of its consciousness. So here's Jetsakapa's commentary already incorporating Chandakirti's auto commentary. I won't try to differentiate them for you. I just want you to know how these are locked in each other. The mind of the I, that is its own potential or tendency, this is a bhakta, karmic potential, that is born as consciousness, was placed in the foundation consciousness just following the moment when another instance of consciousness was ending. So you could never figure that out from the verse, that the just following meant it was planted back in the past, just following an instance of consciousness as it was ending. Once it ripened at a later time, it came to be born as an I consciousness that takes after the appearance of the former instance of consciousness. And I use the phrase takes after here in the way that you say a son takes after his father. You know, just it follows along. I think it's Jesu Jangba, probably. It's similar to Jesu Jepa, actually. Yeah, Jesu Jepa. I'll explain all this. Don't worry. I just need to give you a little bit of lung first. So the mind of the I, that is its own potential or tendency, that is born as consciousness, was placed in the foundation consciousness. That's the kunshi. Just following the moment when another instance of consciousness was ending. Once it ripened at a later time, it came to be born as an I consciousness that takes after the appearance of the former instant of consciousness. Then Chandakirti specifically had said, consider the instant of the potential that serves as the immediate basis for the instant of its own, that is the I's consciousness. Consider the instant of potential from which the I consciousness will arise immediately. All those in the world, because of delusion, think that this is the physical sense faculty of an I, but in fact, there's no I faculty separate from consciousness. This applies in the same way to the rest of the physical faculties. So I'll unpack that. What it's saying is, And eye consciousness, we don't use that word in English every day. I mean, we don't go around and say, my eye consciousness registered that the F train is arriving at the eye consciousness means the awareness of visual appearances. I won't get into it, but this is the entire question of is mind brain would conflate eye consciousness with eye faculty. And yet, if you are a philosopher of mind who accepts qualia, as in things that are appearances that no scientific instrument could ever find, like colors, you still, to all intents and purposes, are accepting the difference between a consciousness and a faculty. Faculty, even in the Buddhist sense, means the physical cells. You can damage the faculty by pulling an eye out and smashing it, as supposedly happened to Arya Sangha. So that has a physicality to it. And the whole point here is that the eye consciousness, oh, wow. As I said that, I just got the entire flashback of the memory of translating in a different part and how it got me to figure out what the problem was here. If the consciousness of a thing, of a brown, I can't say wood because you're not conscious of wood. I can't even be conscious of brown. I can be conscious of visual field. Doesn't have any labels yet. It's even said to be a non-conceptual consciousness. If that consciousness is actually being produced by its causal condition as being the ripening of a karmic seed, that is the storage unit that was created when a moment of consciousness ended a long time ago. You could say, and I'm not sure this is perfectly scripturally correct, but for example, the first time a child is crawling along a wood floor like this, and mommy says, wood, yes, wood. And there's the feeling, and there's the color, and oh, I like the graininess of it, you know, and you get into it. And then maybe you even go to a country where they don't make floors like this. Maybe you live on stone, maybe you live on tile, maybe you live in mud houses, whatever. And then you come back and you walk in a room. Oh yeah, I remember. I like these floors. We've all had this kind of experience, right? So I'm trying to make it vivid. In this kind of visual faculty situation, you could say that the moment the bakchak was planted was not only the seeing, but also tied up with the way you reacted to the seeing of that type of visual image in the past. The seed was planted when another instance of consciousness was ending. Once it ripened at a later time, it came to be born as an eye consciousness that takes after the appearance of the former instance of consciousness. Does that make more sense now?
Can you say that one more time?
So the mind of the eye, that is its own, right, yeah, sorry. Technically, this Mickey Lo is referring to the potential that turns into the consciousness. That's what the language says here. I'm still a little bit uncertain about that, but it's the potential for the eye that arises as consciousness was placed in the foundation consciousness, the storage house, just following the moment when another instance of consciousness was ending. Once it ripened, at a later time, it came to be born as an eye consciousness that takes after the appearance of the former instance of consciousness. Then Chandakirti says, consider the instant of the potential that serves as the immediate basis for the instant of its own, that is the eye's consciousness. So there's this direct, intimate relationship between the potential and the eye consciousness. Consider the instant of potential from which the eye consciousness will arise immediately. That's basically saying the same thing. It's just getting it even sharper, the relationship. All those in the world, because of delusion, think that, quote, this is the sense faculty, the physical sense faculty of an eye. But in fact, there's no eye faculty separate from consciousness. Because in the Abhidharma presentation, the intermediary step is not the Bhakta. The Bhakta, the Duce, then it would be a Samskara, not a Vasana. That's another story. We did that in March. In the Abhidharma presentation, the objective field triggers the physical faculty, which triggers the consciousness. They don't say that the samskara triggered the consciousness. They say that object, faculty, consciousness. So what this mind-only school presentation is giving a lot more weight to what they call the bhaktak, so sorry to confuse you. I translate the word bhaktak, which is a Tibetan word for Sanskrit vasana, as tendency. That is not entirely unique to the mind-only school, but they usually use that word. The Abhidharma systems tend to use the word samskara in Sanskrit, duce in Tibetan, and I translate that as trace. Then there's this word seed, bija in Sanskrit, savan in Tibetan, which is more mind-only school, but I think will occasionally show up in Abhidharma. So this is a minor point, but if anybody gets nervous about my language, I actually tried to think of it. Lots of scholars could. I mean, there are scholars who actually try to follow those words as they come up through different centuries and which context they seem to be used in. It's messy stuff. I'm just looking at how it shows up here. But the point that I'm making is that in the Abhidharma presentation, even though samskaras have a huge influence on the arising of our world, you would not say that the I consciousness directly arises with us, the ripening of a samskara, as its causal condition, and that's a technical word for a certain kind of cause also. And here, the next sentence, Tsongkhapa explicitly says, now in this case, the tendency, vasana, that is the cause for the birth of the I consciousness is its causal condition. And the I faculty, the physical thing, is its governing condition. Dapoikyen. Without going into those causes and conditions, which we did touch a little bit in March, that won't make that much sense, but essentially it's putting the I faculty to the level of contributing condition. It's not the same word as what we usually think of contributing condition, but it's essentially demoting it to a thing that has to be there that governs the way that it will appear as visual field rather than auditory field, but is not the cause for the fact you saw something. So notice what happens, and this will be a good place to leave tonight. What happens if you say that the cause for the arising of a moment of consciousness of visual field doesn't depend upon the visual field and doesn't depend upon the visual faculty, it depends upon the bhaktak? Have you eliminated the need for an outer world? I want to hear what you say. You're so intent. I want to hear what you.
No, my mind is spinning on that one.
Okay.
But I don't like the feel of it.
Oh, we're supposed to be uncomfortable right now. Where's the bhaktak coming from?
Oh, I mean, in that context.
The bhaktak is coming from the moment that it was planted at the end of another moment of consciousness. So you don't actually need anything but consciousness to plant a bhaktak.
But you have to have. We don't have to have a beginning consciousness. You in that case.
No, because bhaktaks can go back from time without beginning, and they are frequently referred to as a bhaktak that you've had with you from time without beginning. So the typical, I use the wood floor, or the color of the wood floor, but a typical example would be the color blue. The visual appearance, the color blue. And what is so radical, if you taste this, what the mind-only school is saying is, you don't need blue to see blue. You just need the tendency to see blue. And you need something to make that tendency ripen. And that should make us really uncomfortable. And it makes Chandakirti uncomfortable, it makes Tsongkhapa uncomfortable, and so on. I see a lot of hands now. I think I'll do a specific time for questions probably over the weekend. So if you can just hold it, because we're going to keep going and hopefully it'll become more clear, or catch me afterward. But because it's late, I'll just keep going for a minute or two more.
What?
As for the teaching that the I faculty is the direct cause for the I consciousness, the true intent of this teaching as it is presented here in this context, it is as presented here in this context where a tendency is ripening into an I consciousness. So it's actually, Jetsakava, commenting on the Mind-Only school, is saying they are reinterpreting the notion of the I faculty as the direct cause for the I consciousness in terms of a tendency ripening into the I consciousness. So I leave you with that thought. If you really think about a world where everything, I have to be so delicate in how I say this. Check your view. If at any point in your life you have accepted the view that everything in your world comes from karma, what do you mean by it? And do you actually, have you thought it through to the level of that means I don't need outer objects to trigger my senses? Because the experience of my senses is arising in a flow that is depending on nothing else but the ripening of bhaktas. And the bhaktak itself, as you may know from Mind-Only School presentation, is splitting into three things: the I consciousness, the I faculty, and the object. And that would be the next thing I'd get to, but I don't want to read anything more to you now. But that is the classic Mind-Only view as taught by Master Sangha. A bhakta rises from the foundation consciousness, turns into the consciousness, the faculty, and the object. He uses more language in terms of the vessel and the living being and so on. But in the end, you can either say that foundation consciousness is perceiving that world, or that world is arising on foundation consciousness, and then these other derivative consciousnesses are perceiving what appeared on the blank, on the, I won't say blank, but the lucid screen. I won't even say lucid because foundation consciousness is murky. The sea of potentiality that is the foundation consciousness. And then the whole world shows up on it. And in the Mind-Only school, it's pretty difficult to say that anything else has causal efficacy but bhaktas. And so I delightedly, I mean, not in a challenging way, but in a fun debate ground way, challenge you, is that what you think it means for everything to come from karma? And if it is, fine, but let's debate it. Because this is actually, in this case, that particular presentation is the one that will be the object of the middle way debate. It's what the middle way likes, but has a big problem with. You see why this is exciting? And as I say, you've all actually read that because it's in ACI 5. And it's in ACI 5 as the Mind-Only school view, not the middle way view. But we need, I think we're like all at the level now where we can start to think through, oh, this is subtle. What is different about the middle way view? And why can they say there are outer objects that can trigger the senses in a merely labeled way, and still things come from karma? And still things come from karma. Like, they're not going to say things don't come from bhaktaks, but it's actually even more subtle than the Mind-Only view.
Do you want to, are you asking? Or is it, are you supposed to think about it?
Okay, you can give me something.
I mean, isn't the only difference that they don't believe in the, not the only difference, but they don't believe in the storehouse, right?
That's not the only difference. Well, we'll get to it. Let's leave it there. Because there's, I'd have to talk for another half an hour to even say what the differences are before analyzing. So,
Just a quick question, just on wording.
okay, yeah.
I was wondering if the takes after was also in terms of like the affinity, or was it just for that thing, or was it?
I looked at it very quickly just now, but Jesa Jepa literally would mean made after.
So it doesn't have a reaction to it.
No, it's the implication is much more that of made in in the mold of. You know how it's like in a factory,
Yeah, yeah.
made after the same mold as, and that's the kind of, I mean, they're not using factory analogies, but that's the analogy of like you got a stamp in the past on consciousness, and then it got stored in that form, and then when it ripens, it's going to come out again as something similar. So the takes after means similar in nature.
Okay, not necessarily your affinity or your just purely as the thing.
In this example of visual consciousness, it's going to have that very raw stamp kind of quality to it. If we were starting to discuss the ripening of an imprint of discomfort in a certain kind of situation and a complex interaction of afflictions, then it's a whole different story. But they tend to try to use simple, apparently simple examples, and then says this applies to all the other sense consciousnesses. But then, as I say, once we get into mental afflictions and feelings and the rest, then. But the basic analogy is, and I have a section on that I can read to you later. The thing that was planted when the moment of consciousness was ending, and then it goes underground, it ripens, and it comes out as something similar. But as we know, because karma grows, it can then generally come out many more times, and sometimes in a much larger form. So I think it's time to dedicate now, because we will watch this moment of consciousness and take in all the things you're perceiving right now, the sequence of thoughts in your own mind, the questions that are there, the eliminations that are there, the murkiness that is there, the doubts that are there, the interest that's there. Look at how many bakchaks are percolating in your mind right now. Like, this is how real we have to think of bakchaks this concretely. And so what is dedication? It's noticing the moment at which the intensity of these particular bakchaks are ending. Because functionally speaking, when you will walk out that door, something will have ended. There was a certain continuity to the time we spent together tonight that had a similarity to it enough to be merely labeled Thursday night class. And when you leave, that consciousness of this class will have ended. So what are we doing in dedication? Rather than letting that slip into the subconscious, whether we call it foundation consciousness or not, that's actually a technical point. There is a subconscious. There is a deeper layer of consciousness where memories will be stored. Is that going to go there in such a way that it gets, like the ending of it is just distracted and lost, so that we have no idea when it might show up again? It might be 3 lifetimes, 5 lifetimes, whatever. Or what do we do in dedication? I love the intensity in your face right now. Is bring that together, connect it to the intention with which we began, that gave the continuity to this karmic act, that draws the arc around it, and hems it in an offering bowl to our ultimate teacher. Buki Jushim Metotram Shirabin Shin Vadi Sangye Shingu Mikte Lupagi Rokunam Shingatu Parsho Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniryatayami Diyogu Suraneshe Sososhin Suraneshe Lejumwe Amparuni Topasho.
Thank you.
Thank you.